He's amazing. He's a poet and a genius.
I want to know who you are.
Welcome to Shawshank.
Here's my direct cell line. What was his name? So what's the story? Yeah, it's better be good. I'm in a bad mood.
I'll show you a little something I've been working on for the past 2 or 3 years.
Toss that dick over here nice and slow, or I will cut you from hole to hole. Come back here! Not so fast, you ingrates! Public news team is taking a break from its pledge drive to kick some ass. I think I wanted this. I told you you were gonna get him back. How am I gonna do that now? How am I gonna trust you? Pass out all the goddamn red weed! Stop. Subway, see what I'm saying? We can hide a little army down there. You stop it!
Or 1 minute, or even 30 seconds. Personally, I don't think we should have to hear it at all.
What are you doing? You're slowing down! You're slowing down! Mustang, this is Voodoo 3. Remaining mechs are bugging out.
It ain't true. I'm trying.
It's gonna be rough.
I'll be fine. As long as it doesn't rain. Before they rot, they buried me in this ratty old cellar with a sleeping bag. Man, Celeste, did they have their food? Love you, honey.
No! No!
God, no, I love you.
Wait! Don't!
I guess it comes down to a simple choice, Billy. Get busy living. You get busy dying.
Tell me about the movies you make.
Well, I listen to stories and decide if they'll make good movies or not.
12:17 a.m. this morning, Pennsylvania senatorial candidate Bob Roberts was shot. As United States Senator, I will see to it that this leniency ends in our lifetime and that criminals like Rathbone get their just due.
Vietnam, look! I'm gonna die.
I want the last thing you see in this world to be a face of love. You look at me. When I do this thing, I'll be a face of love for you.
I love you.
Lynch! Killed! Listen, you black legions! You vigilantes hiding up there in the cradle of the Liberty Committee! When the storm breaks, the cradle will fall! She's a beautiful girl, as pretty as a picture. She's a dating man, as real as today. She's got to be a girl. I want to live beyond my years in Elysian fields, where poets wrestle with injustice, where my heart could rest, where my words would never die. Movies are art, now more than ever. Thank you.
Hey there.
Hi.
Oh.
Hello, everybody. How are we doing today? All right.
My name is Gregory Elwood. I'm with the Playlist, an entertainment news site in the United States. I'm honored to be here today with Mr. Tim Robbins, actor, writer, director, Oscar winner. Thank you so much for coming, sir.
My pleasure.
Just a quick heads up to the photographers. If you could just please take a couple photos at the beginning, and then we would kindly ask you not to during the rest. It would be really appreciated. And then also, we're going to talk about Tim's career, going to talk about a bunch of subjects. When we hit a certain movie or time period in Tim's life, we'll stop and ask if people have questions about that specific film or period. Does that work?
Yeah.
So let's start with the easiest question. What made you want to be an actor?
Oh, okay. So I originally wanted to be a cowboy, and then an astronaut, and then a baseball player, and eventually an actor, because I guess I was the fourth of 4 children, and I had to battle for attention at the dinner table, and the only way to get that kind of attention was to be clever and funny, and so I guess I was aspiring show-off, but I wound up, because I was an actor, being able to pretend to be an astronaut and pretend to be a baseball player, but I have not found my cowboy movie yet, so still looking for that.
We got to get you on Westworld. There's got to be a way to make that happen.
All right. Well, let's work on that.
We'll work on it. So I know that you originally went to school at SUNY Plattsburgh, and then you went to UCLA. What made you grew up in New York? What made you go west to study acting?
Well, my parents actually met at UCLA. They were both in the marching band. My dad was the drum major, the one that is in front of the band, and my mom played the flute, and they fell in love, and they started a family. So I still had family out there, I had grandparents out there, and I had always been curious about California. I grew up in New York City. I didn't really see many beaches or sunshine much in my my childhood, and I was curious about it, and so I transferred when I was 20 years old to UCLA.
And did you feel as though the things you learned there are lessons you learned in terms of acting for the rest of your career, or is it something that happened, afterwards and in the more projects you did, in the years following?
Well, it's a combination of both. Mostly I studied, when I was in university, I studied directing and writing, but I had a distrust of acting teachers because some of them were teaching a method that I was not particularly interested in. I cut my teeth, learned how to act on the streets of New York. I was in a theater company called the Theater for the New City, and every summer we would do plays in the street. We'd pull into a neighborhood, we'd have a truck loaded with platforms, we'd unload the platforms, we'd put up the backdrop, we'd put our costumes on in the truck, we'd do a little parade in the neighborhood, and we'd come and do a social satire on the streets about something that was going on with music and bright costumes. And so I learned how to act with a lot of distractions around traffic and mothers yelling out windows and junkies and drunks coming up on stage with us as the plays were progressing. And so I had a kind of belief in theater as something other than American realism. I kind of avoided that kind of acting. I felt like film was such a more effective medium for telling realistic stories, because you could go into close-ups and see the faces and see the truth in the eyes, and you couldn't do that in theater. And so I adopted a different kind of thinking about theater, which is more European-based and based more on the roots of how theater started in antiquity, which was to tell large stories about the conflict between man and God and morality and justice. And And so this is what we gravitated towards in the theater company. I started 37 years ago. The Actors Gang is still around. And one of my biggest moments as far as learning about acting was with a French actor named Georges Bigot, who was the lead actor at the time of the Théâtre du Soleil from Paris. And they had come to Los Angeles for the Olympics. And there was an Olympics Arts Festival. And George stayed behind and taught a class on the Commedia dell'arte, the Italian art form. And it was there that I had most of my breakthroughs about acting, about what it is, what it means to act, what the importance of it is. George told me once, he said, listen, never assume that anyone in the audience that came to see you could afford the ticket that they paid for today, and also assume that they spent their last dollar on it and had to walk 5 miles because they couldn't afford the bus fare. Always assume that of everybody that is in a theater. And that respect for the live experience, the respect for the idea that theater is so special because you are creating a community in this moment. You're creating a temporary community that will never be there again. This conglomeration of 100 to 1,000 people that is its own chemistry, and you have to meet that particular chemistry to participate in the live event, which made theater for me so much more exciting because it was an experiential thing, not only for the audience, but for the actors as well.
But you were in Los Angeles, and you were trying to break into Hollywood as an actor, and you made, 4 movies, actually. You had 4 credits within, 3 years. During that time at the beginning of your career, what did you think was your big break? What did you go when you got that role, like, oh, this is it?
Well, the first one was, I got an agent when I was in college. I won this competition that they did every year. And it was called the O'Brien Awards, and they had celebrity judges, and I was the winner of this thing, and there were many agents in the audience, and I got an agent out of that. Now, at the time, I was a New Yorker, a punk rocker. I was not into, episodic television. That was not my dream. But I started to audition for these things. I also got a commercial agent, and I started doing auditions for commercials. And I came to realize pretty quickly that I wasn't very good at the commercial auditions. And I'm probably one of the few clients in their history that they dropped, not me, because I went to this disastrous audition, and I had been fed up with it for a while, and they asked me to tell a joke. And I know what they were really doing is they just wanted me to say, like, 20 seconds to hear my voice and see my face and get rid of me. So I was, at that point, just resentful of the whole idea of it. And so I told the longest joke I knew, which was about 6.5 minutes long. And I wouldn't stop. I just kept going. And it's one of those really long jokes that you get to a punchline, and it's like, oh my God, you made me listen to that for 6.5 minutes? Not even funny. So I got home from that audition, and I had a message on my answering machine from my commercial agent that said, we're not going to represent you anymore. But I eventually got lucky. I got a part in a TV show called St. Elsewhere, so I felt that was my first break. But then the thing that really, for me, made the difference was a movie called Five Corners that I did in 1986. And it was a great script by John Patrick Shanley, and it was myself and John Turturro and Jodie Foster. And it was, I loved the script, I loved the part, and it was the first time I felt like, oh, I can do this, I can make a living at this and enjoy the material that I'm doing. Up until that point, for the last 4 years before that, I was viewing the work I was doing on television as a way to pay for theater and to not have to deliver pizzas, which is how I funded my first theater production.
Were you close to going back to New York at all? Were you ever thinking like, let's just go back and do theater in New York?
Yeah, a couple times. Yeah, but I did have this great group of actors that I was working with, and that was probably what made me hold on to Los Angeles. Was I had a whole bunch of people that I had met at UCLA, and we were starting to make our way in theater, the Actors Gang, and so that's really what kept me in Los Angeles.
Well, I have to ask about this film because it was, I think, around the time of Five Corners. But you did a movie called Howard the Duck, which, does anyone know what Howard the Duck is? Anybody? And it was immediately a cult film. And to this day, it's still a cult film. At the time, you're a young actor. You know, it's a George Lucas production. Did you think, wow, this is going to be a big thing? Like, do you remember what your thought process even was about it?
Yeah, it was George Lucas. He'd just done Star Wars. I was like, of course, yeah, it's going to be great. And so, so anyway, walked onto the set the first day and saw the duck. And the duck wasn't the way I saw Howard the Duck. It was kind of clean, nice feathers. But the character of Howard the Duck is just so you know that don't know, he's an alien from outer space, and he's a cigar-chomping, rude, man's man kind of duck, right?
He's an anti-hero like Deadpool is, if you've seen Deadpool.
Yeah, and so what we saw on the set was this cute little duck. It was like, and I was like, wow, I think we're in trouble. And this was the first day. and then it was supposed to go for 3 months. It wound up doubling that, going 6 months. I spent about 6 weeks in an ultralight trying to get one scene. It was crazy. We wound up, going way over budget, way over, and it just. Anyway, yes, it was a cult film. That's a very polite way of putting it, but it also won a few golden raspberries as well. Yeah.
During that time, was it the idea that you had your acting troupe keeping you going, keeping you sane during all this?
It still is that. My acting company has provided an oasis for me, and it's the only way I can really live in Los Angeles, because I'm not a person that goes out a lot, and I always I'm uncomfortable when I'm at those kinds of parties in Hollywood. I just view it as a waste of time, really. And but this isn't anything new. This is when I was starting the Actors Gang and starting my career. My agents and people that were advising me would tell me, "You got to go hang out with so and so and so and so and so and so." And the hot club at the time was the Hard Rock Cafe. That just shows you how long ago. And it was like, you got to go to the Hard Rock Cafe because that's where all those brat packers are. And I'm like, actually, I'm going to be downtown and we're rehearsing a German expressionist play, and you're welcome to come see it. It's from 1922. It's by Ivan Gall, and it's about the conflict between the early people that rejected communism, and they're like, what are you doing? Why are you doing theater in Los Angeles? And I was like, it's keeping me sane. I can't, there's a certain artificial level of the industry that it's a really good thing to avoid if you can. I think fame is a really dangerous thing because it starts elevating people and in a way that is unnatural and not particularly healthy, I don't think, for keeping fresh, for remaining true to whatever the impulse was that brought you to try to create. And when you're being celebrated too much, and when you're being elevated to this kind of status of, royalty, it's, I think, tremendously dangerous for an artist.
So after Five Corners, though, you got what I would guess, from my opinion, was your first huge sort of break in terms of American populism and worldwide populism in Bull Durham, and it's an incredible film.
Thank you.
we've talked about before about how you loved baseball and softball. Did that help get you the role at all? Was that a big part of it?
Oh yeah, part of the audition for Bull Durham was to throw a baseball, and so I had to pass that test. Ron Shelton, who directed it, didn't want anybody on screen that had not played baseball. So.
When you got the script, did you realize what sort of a game changer it was? There hadn't really been a film like that in so long, at least that a Hollywood studio was making, especially about sports. Was that something that popped in your mind when you were reading it?
Yeah, I loved it. I loved the script because, I think where sports movies go wrong is where, and Ron says this, no one ever hits a grand slam in the bottom of the ninth to win the World Series. It just doesn't happen. But you'll see that in a movie. Right? And I think Ron's quote about it is that a game ends with a weak grounder to third. And that's the kind of movie he wanted to do. And because he was a baseball player himself and because he understood all the intricacies of what it was to play in minor league ball, there was an authenticity to it that I think really resonated with the audiences.
And I remember even, players would be interviewed and talk about it as to this day as one of their favorite films. Do you run into professional athletes and what do they say to you? Is there a scene, is there a moment where they're like, that happened to me?
Yeah, they'll say, a lot of them have said, yeah, we have our own meat. My nickname in that movie was Meat. And there's usually someone on every team that's called Meat. And people, the baseball players I've met, and also hockey players that really love that film. They play it on the bus all the time.
Do you have any memories from making it that sort of pop in your mind?
Yeah. Yeah, I had this really cool car. It was really fast, and I got it because of the character. I wanted to, because I'm not a car guy, but I had this really fancy kind of sports car I rented for the shooting of the movie just to, absorb myself more in the stupidity of who this guy was, right? And the other thing that not a lot of people know is one of the models I used for Nuclear Luge was the Tony Manero character in Saturday Night Fever that John Travolta played. Do you remember that film, Saturday Night Fever? Really? The disco movie, Well, my Nuke thought that guy was the coolest guy in the world. So that was what the way I dressed and the way I acted. I wanted to be kind of like a version of Tony Manero.
So because there's a scene where he's dancing with at that bar. Was it something that Ron put in because you told him this, or was that always there?
No, that was always there. That was always there.
Does anyone have any questions about Bull Durham? Please. Or questions in general?
But my question is more about Howard the Duck and Bull Durham, because you've touched on 2 points of something that you walked on set day one, and you're like, oh, this thing's going to be a train wreck, and the joy you got out of Bull Durham. So my question is this. You have such a long career, and with any job that you do, there's going to be highs and lows. How do you sustain yourself with those real lows, where wow, I'm on set for how long for this?
Yeah. I've learned to do it. I've learned better ways to do it, healthier ways to deal with that. Actually, on Howard the Duck, one of the ways I dealt with it was I had bought my first video camera. And so I just started making movies on the set of Howard the Duck because I had all this time, right? So I just found them in a box about a month ago. And I have 3 films that I kind of edited in camera on the set of Howard the Duck using all the actors and the crew members from it. Different strategies. What I've learned is that the best way to avoid it is to really look at the script and not believe that you can fix the script while you're shooting. That was a mistake. That tends to be a mistake. You go, if you say yes because you like the idea of it, but the script isn't there, that can lead to a lot of frustrating things. So I've learned to be very specific and and about what kind of scripts I do. So, and the other thing is, I don't ever want to be in a position, and I'm lucky so far, knock wood, where I have to work, and I have to make a compromise to what I want to be in at this stage of my life. And so, it's why I don't work that much, is because I really need to be in love with something in order to spend that kind of time trying to create it. Where I think it goes wrong is where you are simply working for the sake of working. And I think a lot of actors who only act tend to do that. And I'm becoming more and more convinced that some people are actually working just because they like being treated the way they are treated on a set, rather than that they want to do anything particularly artistic with the work they're doing. And that's okay. There's some people, they're just professional actors and they want to be on a set. That's cool. But I've got a theater company. I've got a way to do new work and workshop new ideas with a great group of actors. I have a rehabilitation program that I help run and I teach in at the Actors Gang, and we're in 12 California prisons right now. And so on a regular basis, I'm going in and doing workshops with incarcerated men and women. And I've got a couple documentaries I'm working on. I've got my music. So I have a lot of distraction that I don't really need to act if I'm not in love with the project.
So what about if you love the project, what about the acting process gets you the most excited? Is it interacting with other actors? Is it learning the characters? Is it seeing the final product? What is the love for you in it?
The love is in the story. Like, what story are we telling, and why is this important to be telling right now? It's something I always talk to the actors that I work with, that I direct in the Actors Gang, that if we're going to be on stage, it's got to have some reason, right? It's got to be important. If your character is in this scene, in this play, the playwright has written your entrance and your exit. So what is the essential importance of those moments on stage? And so when we're approaching it, we always approach with the idea that always one must be in a complete state of emotion. And the states of emotion have to be in the extremes, because no great playwright or a novelist ever wrote a great story about a mildly depressed person or a sort of happy person. Or we're always the gift of being able to create a story is to try to find these moments in people's lives that are extreme, so important. This moment is so important. And to treat everything like that, so that's my filter, at least, on how I look at what to do and what not to do.
Well, that's a good segue to talk about one of the films that is screening here at the festival, your directorial debut, Bob Roberts. What made you, first of all, not only write it and direct it, but actually you starred in it as well? What was your passion behind making that film?
Well, two things. One, my father was a folk singer, and so I'd lived with that music all my life, and I had seen during the Reagan years the appropriation of culture, this idea that in political ads and things, trying to appropriate either a Bruce Springsteen song or a Bob Dylan lyric and trying to make that work for you. And I just found that so contemptible that it kind of made me want to do a satire about that, appropriation of culture. And the other thing that was driving me on that show was I had, at that point, been doing Actors Gang for about 10 years, and I had done 3 plays that I'd written, co-written and directed, which were all satires about what was happening right now in America. One of them about religious fundamentalism, one of them about, again, appropriation of culture. and another about the American Medicine Show. And so I had already been in that mode of how do we make great theater that's entertaining, amusing, but also speaks to us about the life we are living right now in this moment in America.
And it's funny, I was watching some clips of it earlier today, and it struck me how much of it is still contemporary today, at least in the American political environment. And I don't know if I would have thought that 10 or 15 years ago. Maybe I would have during the Bush years, but it certainly, 8 years ago, I wouldn't have thought that necessarily. When you were making it at the time, and by the way, how many people have seen Bob Roberts? I feel like we should. Oh, good, yay! But in case you don't know, it's about a senatorial candidate. He's a millionaire, self-made millionaire, who sings while he does all his sort of concert or his campaigning. And he is Republican, and he is actually, I should let you sort of finish it. You can probably give a much better sense of it than me.
He's a very, very successful businessman who has a trading floor in his bus. He also is a musician, and he likes beauty pageants. And
it sounds so familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah, right? I didn't know at the time. Oh my God, I'm sorry. No, but all of the elements that would propel Trump to the White House existed back then. It was all of the seeds were being laid for this. One of them in particular was something that happened during the Reagan administration, the deregulation of who could own news media and how many they could own. There used to be laws about that. It was, and there was a thing called the Fairness Doctrine that ensured that every time a political expression was done on television, the opposite political expression had to be represented by law. And Reagan got rid of that law, and that was when it started to all go downhill. And 30 years later, 40 years later, we have 4 companies that control all the information that is being given to the United States, the people in the United States. But we already saw that in 1992. There was a radio people that were on stations all across America being funded by the right wing. And here's what they had to do, and I'll just be brief with this. But what they had to do, they realized that they were going to lose the majority. The conservative white voter was becoming a minority. And the strategy was to try to figure out how to get people to vote against their best interests. How to vote for politicians that were going to give tax breaks to the wealthy, but the way you do that is you make them fear other people. You make them fear immigrants, you make them fear Democrats, you make them fear anyone that might actually be on your side and actually be working for you. And they were very, very effective in this propaganda, and it worked. And it was an unrelenting stream of lies that started in the mid-'80s and continued on till that election. And it's not an accident, it was a strategy.
And the other interesting thing about it is there's a scene where his followers, Bob Roberts' followers, basically admit to, it's a mockumentary to the person behind the camera. Oh, we know he's lying. We know he's not doing this. We don't care. We love him anyway. Which is literally, at least in the United States, what you always hear from Trump supporters is they don't care. And that's sort of what made it sort of pop to me as being, again, just so relevant. When you were making it at the time, did you think, 10 years from now, 15, 20 years, we'll be up beyond this. This is a film of its time? Or did you realize that this was something that will always be consistent no matter what country, all through Europe, they're facing the same things as well?
The latter. Harry Belafonte once said to me, "Why do you think they call it the struggle? This quest for justice, this quest for fairness. It's called the struggle. And it's the struggle because it's going to be a constant thing. Don't think you're going to win. Don't think you're going to win and everyone's going to be okay. Because fascism will always be there, and it will always try to come back. And our job as artists and citizens is to try to call attention to that anytime it starts to rear its head. And it's rearing its head again and again. And we have to, again, fight against it, and we will win. In the long run, we will win. But there are no, like, victories where it's going to go away forever. It's just part of human nature, and it's part of the struggle between people that want to be in power and take your money and make you love them at the same time. There's going to be narratives and propaganda that will try to make that happen again and again and again and again. You know, what happened in 2008 was, a massive robbery of the American people before Obama was elected. During the last years of the Bush administration, all of these 501ks and IRAs just went away. Just massive, massive theft of money from working people. And the fact that there wasn't a outrage at that is kind of an indication of how effective the propaganda is.
It does a good job. From a filmmaking process, though, again, you starred, wrote, and direct this film, and it was a mockumentary, which is not a traditional narrative at all. Harder? Is it obvious to say that it was harder than you thought it was going to be, or was it invigorating? What was the process like?
It was great. It was invigorating. It was scary as hell. I had to know all my lines because I didn't have time to rehearse, and I had a great cinematographer, Jean Lapine, who I had just done The Player with Robert Altman, and so Jean was his cinematographer, and I took his first AD, Alan Nichols, and I had my designer, and I had a really competent crew, and I had confidence in them, and I had just been at the best film school that I could possibly have ever gone to, which was the Robert Altman School. I was on the set of The Player watching him like a hawk, knowing that I was going to direct next, and I absorbed a lot of his incredible insight and talent, and he made me part of the collaborative process, which was a huge shot in the arm for me. When I was growing up, Robert Altman was a hero of mine, and the first film I ever saw that made me want to do film was his film Nashville, and so to be able to collaborate with him and also learn from him about directing was a great gift.
Do you remember the one thing you took away that before you made your own film, that you thought, oh, don't forget, Robert always does this?
Okay, so we're in pre-production. I'm in the office with him. We're talking about scenes. We're rewriting stuff. And a crew member comes in and he says, Bob, I have a question, blah, 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 blah. And Altman's response was, what do you think? And to the crew member. And I knew that Bob knew the answer to it. I knew that Bob knew what he wanted. But he wanted to encourage everyone on his crew, from every actor to every crew member, to even the guy that does the craft service, that you're all part of this creative process. And you have ideas, bring your ideas. It's such a wise thing, because to be asked a question, to know the answer, and then to say, what do you think, is to offer the possibility that you might not be right, that there might be some better idea, right? Yeah. And to be the auteur in your own mind, to be the expert in your own mind, And to just answer questions like this and this and this and this, like to prove to everyone that you're the auteur, you stop growing. You stop expanding as an artist because you're the expert. So there's a certain humility in it and a wisdom at the same time that I found really inspiring, and I tried to steal that from him. Yeah.
So I'm curious because you were also in his film Pret-a-Porter, and both in the player and Pret-a-Porter, and I'm pretty sure you're in the scene in Pret-a-Porter. There are both those films have long extended scenes, which by the way, for shooting on film was much harder than it is today on digital. But the opening of the player, and then there's like a party scene I remember in Pret-a-Porter that everyone's walking through, and I don't really think there's a cut for a while.
Right.
How would he work with the actors in that way and not make it dictatorial? How did he make it so that everyone felt as though they were part of what was going on?
Yeah, okay, so the opening shot of the player was really, talk about gambling. It was about a 7-minute shot or something, and it sets up everything in the movie, right? And so we took one day and we rehearsed it. But here's what we didn't have. We didn't have the script. Every single take was different. All the pitches with the Buck Henry and the other people that were pitching me, every time we did it, it was something else coming out of their mouth.
So historically, there were 15 takes. The 10th take is the one that's used in the film, and you can know this because it says 10 when
yes.
at the beginning. So every single time it was improvised differently?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there was a choreography of movement of certain people going certain places, but all of the dialogue was improvised. So everything from the tour person to the guy that was trying to get in my office to the pitches that were said in my office every take was different. That's
incredible. Did you have confidence that it was going to work? Do you remember thinking like, this is cool, this is going to be great?
Yeah.
Or were you nervous?
No, I was like, I love a challenge, right? And, to understand also that the people I was talking to in the office, Buck Henry is a genius. He wrote The Graduate, he's and I get to play a scene with him. I get to improvise a scene with him. And just the amount of talent on that movie. Every day was an adventure. It was always a joy because it was such an open process. It was, what kind of new ideas can we come up with today? It wasn't one of those things where you're looking at a script and you're going, I know every single line and we're going to do it over and over again that way. It was like, how can we fuck shit up today? How can we mess around with this? And so that's where, stuff like, anytime I was in a restaurant, I wanted to order a different kind of water, right? Because I considered the character unduly obsessed with finding the perfect water, right? And that became a running joke, and so every day we'd have new names for water that would flow out, and anyway, so it was a real joy.
And again, another film that you would not have thought or at the time probably would have thought was, dated or going to be of its time. But Hollywood is still really a lot like The Player. Like, I'm pretty convinced that what your character does, Griffin, he could kill someone, hide it, and become the head of the studio within a year.
Yeah,
that still happens. Are there any questions from the audience? Okay, so we're going to take right there.
Thank you. I have to ask you 2 questions, but I'll be quick. I'll try to be well. You mentioned reality and realism in film. Is it like that? I don't need a microphone, really. I can shout. So you mentioned realism and reality, and I was curious if you could say more. Like, what kind of reality do you think that film constitutes or has potentiality to constitute? And the other thing I wanted to ask you, you mentioned, you used 2 words, artist and the citizen, and transformation that happens along the lines. So I was thinking whether you would consider actually that act of creation to be transformative and therefore becomes an act of citizenship. Would you think along those lines that act of creation, a genuine act of creation, I'm not talking about Hollywood reproduction and all that nonsense, but genuine act of creation actually that produces an artist. It doesn't go like I'm an artist, so I act, but vice versa, that there is something that constitutes you, transforms the scene, constitutes a new reality, and that would be like a citizen in a full sense, not just holding a passport or citizenship in a legal way. So, thank you.
I think I'll answer that by quoting Woody Guthrie, who was a folk singer in the United States in the 40s and 50s. He said, the job of the folk singer, and you can substitute artist or filmmaker for this, but the job of the folk singer is to disturb the comfortable and to comfort the disturbed. I think that's the role of an artist. Regarding the first part of your question, I think what we're all hoping and striving for, whether we're creating a realistic depiction or a expressionistic or impressionistic depiction of reality, what we're looking for is the truth. Not realistic, but truth. And truth can manifest in any form. Truth can manifest with no words, in dance and in film without words. That's the elusive and important ambition I think we all should, at least I'm always striving for, is how do you create truth that resonates with people, that hits them right in the heart, that says that you look at it and you say, I know, that is the way it is. And that, that's an exciting thing when that happens, It doesn't happen easily, and you have to work to get there. There's some people that are instinctually good at creating characters and pretending to be somebody else. But I don't think that's enough. I think you got to get super deep to find the truth so that it really resonates. I'm not that interested in just pretending. I want to get in there. And I want to, speak to something that is that doesn't really need language, that doesn't really need explanation. It's just simply true.
Any other questions? Oh, this gentleman right there.
You are director, actor, and also you have your own band. I wanted to ask you, if you are on stage getting the Academy Award and people are applauding you, and you are behind the camera or you are with the band on stage, is the artistic satisfaction different? Because on film you work with a team, and with a band you just play for yourself, for your heart, for your spirit. And also, you have a gig on Wednesday. Did they ask you to play, or you say, hey, I have a band, can I have a gig? And can I say, people, this is a different Tim Robbins playing music, and I want to give you my message. Thank you.
I love playing music. It's a different experience. Yeah, you're right. You have a team. And when you're doing a film in particular, because it's a medium that is recorded and then put together, sometimes your team can save your ass, right? Pick the best take, not use something. you know, when you put together a film, you're putting together what you believe is the best of what you've shot. With a band and you're on stage live, man, if you make a mistake, it's yours. You own that, you know. And so I love the immediacy of that, the challenge of that, and what I like most about it is the idea that we can, in this moment, and hopefully this will happen on Wednesday, and I hope to see some of you there on Wednesday, is that in this moment we can create something together through music. We can create a community for 2 hours. We can sing together. We can dance together. We can feel together. That's what is beautiful and magical about live theater, live music. And so I've done it over the last 10 years in various spots around the world. So I'm always looking for an opportunity to play with my band. And so when I'm in Europe, because my band lives in England, it's a lot more possible to do shows in Europe than to do in North America. So yeah, the last show we did was in Ravello in Italy 2 years ago, in a beautiful open theater overlooking the Mediterranean. And yes, I'm always looking for an opportunity to play.
I want to ask you about the Shawshank Redemption. How many people have seen the Shawshank Redemption? Guessing, yeah, everybody's seen the Shawshank. You may not know this at the time for people who are under a certain age, but when it first came out, it was not this huge hit, whether in the US or around the world. And it's this film that had this amazing life by people catching it on television and by renting it at the time on VHS and then DVD. I'm just curious, when did you realize that this film had become something special, that it meant more to people than you know, the 5 or 6 other films they see a year in a theater?
Well, first, you're right. It wasn't that successful when it came out.
It did have 7 Academy Award nominations.
It did, but there weren't a lot of people who went to see it in the movie theaters. And I believe part of that reason was people could not remember the title. And there were so many people that came up to me after it came out saying, "Oh yeah, I saw you in that Scrimshaw reduction, or that Shimshank. What was that? Shankshaw. Reduction. And I had another movie like that with the Hudsucker Proxy. No one knew what a Hudsucker was or a proxy was, so it was like, what the hell is that? Yeah, but I guess the first time it occurred to me that it was a different kind of animal, Shawshank, I think was when it was like 6 or 7 years after it came out. And it was listed as the top loved film on IMDb. And it just edged over The Godfather. And I was like, what? And it has stayed there for, 15 years.
It's been named years later as one of the top movies of the 90s, which it was critically acclaimed at the time, but it was not, it wasn't like cinephiles were putting it up on a mantle, which they do now.
No, they don't. Like, if you look at AFI, it's not even on that list.
Well,
the top 100 films or something like that. There is a little critical snobbery about that.
You still think there is today?
I don't know about today, but I know there has been. And that's okay, because the people are going to determine what it is anyway, and they have determined that it is something that they love, and I'm humbled by that. I love that film. I love that people love it. I have had so many people come up to me and talk about the importance of that film to them personally. it changed their life in some way. It made them forgive somebody. It made them love somebody. It made them, I had a doctor tell me, it made me stop this idea, it just made me challenge everything I had learned. And he said, I was prescribing people drugs that weren't healing them, and I realized I was a fraud, and I needed to heal. Somehow that movie told that to him, and and then I talked to guys in prison all the time. That film is super important. The idea of holding on to hope, the idea of holding on to the concept of freedom that can exist even when you're incarcerated, by what you do for your mind and your spirit with the time you have inside. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm just thrilled that it has had the life it's had.
And the interesting contradiction in a way is that the next film you made was a film that really isn't about having hope, which was Dead Man Walking. Had you already decided to make that film while you were working on Shawshank? Was it a bit later?
It was a bit later. I was working, actually, I was writing Cradle Will Rock while I was shooting Shawshank. So I wanted to do that as my second film. And then Susan Sarandon brought me the book of Dead Man Walking. And she had met Sister Helen, and she asked me if I wanted to adapt it. And I said, yeah, I did, but I'm working on this other script right now. And then a couple of months passed, and she was like, okay, listen, you can either do it or not, And I was like, all right, let me read it. And
she was going to take it to somebody else to get it made?
Yeah, she was like, I want to do this. But yeah, so I read it, and then, as a writer, I like to research a lot, and so Bob Roberts took me a while, and Cradle Will Rock took me about 5 years to write. But Dead Man Walking, that book was so good that I just went through the book, highlighted some stuff. I had a script within 2 months, and we were shooting 3 months after that.
Which is almost, even for an indie, that's almost unheard of.
Yeah.
How were you guys able to make it come together so fast? Was it because both Susan and Sean were on board?
Yeah. Yeah. Sean had just retired from acting. He had just announced it publicly. I'm not acting anymore.
1994, no longer acting.
And so when I read that, I was like, yeah, I've felt that before. And so I didn't think he had, I sent him the script, and he loved it, and he was on board. But yeah, it came together really quickly. Yeah.
Is it obvious to say that the execution scene at the end was the one that you might have been the most concerned about getting right? That it had to be perfect for the whole film to work?
Yes, in so many different ways, in the way we shot it, in what the music was, in how we edited it. And one thing that I did in the editing process, I had shot Peter Sarsgaard it was his first movie, and he played one of the kids that was killed. And he and this woman named Missy Yeager, and I had hired them to be down in New Orleans for the entire shoot, because I didn't know where and when I wanted to put their faces or have them appear in a shadow so they were kind of on call for the whole movie. And so by the time we were shooting that, I had them in reflections in the glass in the execution chamber. And then in the editing room, I felt it was necessary to go back to the murder. And that was a point of contention with a lot of people, because they felt, as one person said it to me, you have everyone sympathetic towards Sean's character at this point, and why are you reminding them of the murder? And for me, it was very simple. That is part of this story, and if you're going to have those kinds of feelings of compassion for this guy, let's make sure those are real feelings of compassion. and let's put it to the test. And let's remind everyone what happened. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, if we didn't have that in there, I felt it would have been manipulative. I felt it would have been an argument you can win in the moment, but once the movie's over, the argument goes away. Whereas if you remind people of exactly what happened, and they still are conflicted, then you can see change happen. And we did. We saw a lot of people change their minds on the death penalty. And Sister Helen, who before the movie came out would be touring all over the United States, playing to 15 people, 20 people here, now is doing the same thing, but there's like 2,000 people coming out to see her talk. And she was the most effective advocate there could be because of her direct personal experience with the whole process, from counseling people that were going to die to taking on the legal system that was and the disparities of justice that were happening throughout the United States. And so about 5 years after the movie came out, Sister she called me up. She says, "Do you know, Tim, there's a play by this guy Arthur Miller, and he's wrote this thing called Death of a Salesman." And she said, "Do you realize that every night that play is performed somewhere in the world?" And I said, "No, I didn't realize that, Sister Helen." She goes, "We got to make a play of Dead Man Walking, right?" So I adapted the movie to be a play, and we did a reading, and there was talk about doing it on Broadway. And at the time, I just didn't want to do that. So I decided to do the opposite, which was usually when a play comes out, it starts on Broadway, it goes to off-Broadway, it goes to community, regional theater, then it goes on tour, regional theater, community theater, eventually high schools, colleges, right? So our plan was 10 years, we're going to go the opposite way. We're going to start in universities, and we're going to give the rights to perform the play to the theater departments only if they can convince 2 other departments in the university to offer courses on the death penalty and to use Sister Helen's book as part of the syllabus. And 10 years later, we had been in 260 universities across the United States. And dialogues happened every time the play was performed. Cross-cultural, law departments, theology departments, philosophy, and all the departments would come together and have symposiums on the death penalty, invite speakers to come in and debate. So we got, through these 10 years, this incredible dialogue going on with young people addressing it. And one of the things that Sister Helen always said is that when the actors or the kids come to it and have to act it, they have to feel it. They have to take on a point of view that might not be theirs and feel that emotionally. And that kind of gestation created, I believe, and she believes, a kind of cultural shift that's happened. So now there's less and less states that support the death penalty. There's been moratoriums in certain states. And Sister Helen has, played the movie for Pope, what's his name? John Paul, I believe?
The current Pope?
No, not back when in the movie.
It was John Paul, I think, yeah.
Yeah, and he changed he wrote an encyclical after he saw the film that originally the Catholic Church was against the death penalty, but allowed for certain circumstances the state to determine whether it should be enacted or not. They removed that last part. So now it's unequivocally against the death penalty. And so there's little things like this that have been happening since the movie came out that I believe will eventually lead to the abolition of the death penalty in the United States.
That's incredible that the movie can have such a life so many years later. I was curious, do you feel as though because Dead Man Walking was such a success, you were nominated for Best Director, Susan won Best Actress, that's how you got Cradle Will Rock made? Did that help get that movie made?
Absolutely. And because I I was lucky enough to be in one of the last offices in Hollywood where one man could say, yeah, kid, let's do that movie. And that was Joe Roth, who was running Disney at the time. And Joe and I had known each other for a while. I'd worked for him as an actor a few times. And he had loved Dead Man Walking so much that he gave me the green light to do this dream project I had, which, you know, it's a miracle it was made, quite frankly. It's a movie about what it was to be in creative endeavors in the 1930s. During our economic bad times, we had some great government programs that put artists back to work, and the idea was that in a depression, it's not good enough just to give people jobs, you have to lift their spirits as well, which is a visionary thing for a government to do, and a celebration of that. And when it came out, Joe Roth had just left his job. And so we were kind of left without the support of the studio. And so, you know, Altman was once asked, like, what's your favorite film of the ones you've done? And his answer was perfect. He said, well, I kind of think of it like I think of my kids. I love the ones that don't get the attention.
What did he say? Why?
Because it's easy to say that I love Shawshank, right? Sure. Because it had been such a beautiful ride. But I love that film because I feel it needs more attention, you know? And it still works, I think.
What was your, you know...
Oh, we're screening it, right?
Yes, it's screening here, actually.
No, it's
tonight. It's tonight. You should go see it. It has.
No, that's Shawshank tonight. Tomorrow night is Cradle Will Rock.
Tomorrow, if you have not seen Cradle, you should go see it. It has an incredible cast. Like, I don't even know if at the time you realized how awesome that cast was, because Emily had just done Breaking the Waves, I think, right?
Yes.
But she was still sort of just coming up. But both John and Joan Cusack are in it. I think it's one of the few films they're both in together, which is sort of rare. Hank Azaria is amazing in it. Bill Murray, John Turturro, Vanessa Redgrave. Did you realize...
Jack Black. And Kyle Gass. Tenacious D is in there.
Yeah. Did you realize what a great ensemble you had? That
I did, and I was so in love with all of them. It was shooting in New York. It was a period movie, so every time we'd go onto the set, there'd be like some amazing, you know, thing that made it look like 1930, and all the women were, you know, had these amazing hairdos and costumes, and yeah, it was a real joy to make. And a lot of them were friends of mine, so it was a passion project for all of them, and yeah, it was a lovely experience.
Well, you sort of joked a little bit about the fact that Joe Roth left the studio, and one of the big sort of like unsaid rules in Hollywood, or sort of lessons, is that, you know, if the person who greenlight your movie leaves, chances are the person who comes in may not support it as much. And not only that, you were making a movie at a studio that didn't really make movies like Cradle Will Rock. Touchstone was a division of Disney. What was your feelings about the release of it? Were you just happy it got made? Were you disappointed? Like, can you talk about that at all?
Okay, so the week it came out, first of all, we went to Cannes with it. It was invited to Cannes in competition. And I remember the night of the screening was so amazing. I had a lot of the cast there, and there was a 5-minute long standing ovation. And I thought, we're in, right? We're set. And we had a good time that night. We drank and, you know, had to be up at like 8 in the morning for interviews, right? And the guy that was doing the hair and makeup came in with this long face on, and he had read some stuff that was written about it. And it was like, I don't know exactly what it was, but there was a reaction to it that was kind of political, and I don't know that it ever recovered from that. We knew it was great. We had great notices. There were great reviews. But when it got around to whether and how it was going to be released, the studio just didn't want to have anything to do with it. And I remember doing some research on because it was playing in New York and LA to qualify for awards. And it came out in January in most of the country. And the release was in only 100 theaters. And I had my assistant at the time do some research and look at all the markets of where it was playing. And discovered that there was absolutely no advertising for it. It was just put in 1 or 2 theaters in every market for 1 week only, and that was a contractual thing. So there's an expression, it's called dumping a movie.
Yeah, I was about to say, yeah.
That's what they did. They dumped that movie. And that was heartbreaking, quite frankly, because it was a passion project for me, and I knew the film was great. I knew it had played beautifully in front of audiences. And that was a tough thing to have to deal with. What was really confusing to me was when I became aware that it had never gotten released in Australia, which is an English-speaking place. And you talk about that cast. Yeah, like why wouldn't you release it? Even on videocassette or DVD.
Yeah, that's actually very strange.
You can't even find the movie. And then we had different reports from around the world. In Spain, they loved it. It was a huge hit. It won SICUS, Best Film, Best Director. In South Africa, which had just been liberated. Huge hit. But not released in territories. I don't think it was ever released in Germany. I don't know exactly what the inner machinations of these business decisions were, but I found it very curious that you wouldn't try to make some of your money back with a great cast like that, even in a video release or a DVD release.
That is really bizarre.
It is bizarre.
Interesting. It feels like there's like a 20th anniversary investigative piece that needs to be written about why the film didn't get released all across the world.
You're the man to do it.
I'm the man to do it. Are there any other questions from people? Oh, let's see if there's somebody else has one. Anybody else? Oh, you ma'am right there. Oh, wait, hold on. They're going to bring you a mic, I think.
Hello, I don't really have a question.
Oh, sorry, we didn't see you. Go ahead. Apologies. Oh no, go ahead.
All right, it's just a quick. It's not really a question, but I thought you might like to know this. According to Czechoslovakian movie database, Shawshank Redemption is the best-rated movie from our two nations. So thank you for that.
All right, thank you. That's great to hear. I was filming a film in rural China, and by rural China I mean flew into Shanghai, took a flight 2.5 hours interior, and then drove another 3 hours to a rural place where we were shooting in China, and they knew Shawshank there. Oh my God. Yeah, which was when I was like, wow.
Oh, that is amazing. Miss, did you have a question?
Okay, I have 2 really quick questions. So the first one is, do you have any films that really resonated or touched you or that you loved in the past couple of years? And then the second one is there anything in cinema now that you feel like is missing and that you would like to see more of?
So just in case you didn't hear, the first question was, is there any films you've seen over the past couple of years that really resonated with you? And then second, is there anything missing in cinema now that you would like to see? Is that correct?
So I'd say my favorite movies of last year were The Square. You know this film? Yeah. Wow, that's an amazing movie. And The Lobster. And 13th, a documentary called 13th. But the film that I think about most often is a documentary I saw last year called I Am Not Your Negro. It's a documentary about James Baldwin. And for me, it was one of those, I had to keep stopping it because the levels of truth were so strong. that I had to keep hearing it. It just kept blowing me away. James Baldwin was a genius, and everything he says in this documentary is the biggest truth that we should be dealing with right now in our country about racism, about this constant angst and discomfort that everybody in America is in, and the reasons why we are in that discomfort. It's a really important movie. And I have to say, I loved Loves of a Blonde last night. I've never seen that movie, the Milos Forman movie. And I gotta say, it was just extraordinarily beautiful. It was, because it was so detailed and so specific about such a thing that we don't tend to think about or tell stories about anymore in cinema, which is a young girl in love or wanting to be in love. I think we're so guided by distraction now, right? We're so this condescending. I talked earlier about the respect for the audience, right? The idea that when you're doing something that you should respect that every audience member has made this decision to be here with you and has spent money to be here with you. I just feel like right now, the people that are telling some of these stories have contempt for their audience. That they have this condescending attitude that you have to keep them like, come on, everyone has ADD and you just have to keep, explosion, fight, murder, yay, naked, yay, everything. Just keep them all, hey guys, we're doing a film, huh? Whereas the best films are about, again, truth, something about a human condition, some kind of vulnerability, some kind of weakness, some kind of strength that we want to tell a story about. We should respect our audiences more, but we don't. We want to distract them. We want to, there's almost like a mathematical formula for how many loud noises are in a movie, and they have to feed this this monster that they just like it's too much for me. Even the movies that everyone says, oh, this is so great. I look at it and say, oh my God, murder, 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 death, 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 death. This is entertainment? I mean, really? It's like we have reduced the whole idea of justice to one man's whim. One man, your hero, is the judge, the jury, and the executioner of the bad guy. And I remember action movies in the early 70s where you'd have your hero and he'd be pursuing the bad guy, and he'd get to the end of the film and he'd be chasing this guy and he'd have the gun on him like this, and as a hero he would not pull the trigger because he was going to allow justice to do it. And then we hit this crucial point where the guy, instead of allowing justice to do it, was going to do it himself. And he would say something clever, like, fuck you. And he'd kill him. And the audience would applaud. I think that's where we lost our way, honestly. Because if we're going to be telling stories that we hope will reflect on the whole, what we're doing there is propaganda. It's a propaganda that's very dangerous for our society. To allow a character of some kind of authority, police, detective, private angry citizen, to be everything, the judge, the jury, and the executioner, we're sending a very dangerous message out. And it's the same thing that's manifesting right now in the United States. This idea of unbridled hatred and distrust and contempt for people that are incredibly courageous and incredibly noble to be able to leave behind everything that they love because they simply cannot live where they love anymore. And for their own safety have to leave. And for the safety of their children have to leave. This takes tremendous courage. This takes tremendous nobility and strength. And we treat them with such contempt. We treat them like they're trying to get something from us instead of recognizing them for the heroes they are. I just think it's absolutely, we've lost it. We've lost our sense of who we are. We've lost our sense of humanity to allow this to happen in our country. To treat a mother who is trying to get away from murderers by calling her all kinds of horrible names and taking her child away from her, treating her like a criminal. How dare they? How dare they do that? Because in every one of those people making a judgment about that young Mexican woman or that young woman from Honduras, if you go back 1, 2, 3 generations, they're an immigrant. Everybody in the United States is an immigrant. Unless you're a pure blood from an indigenous tribe, you are at one point your great-great-great-grandmother or your grandmother or your father or your mother made that journey. And they were noble and they were strong, and that DNA constructed our country. That courage, that resolve, that nobility is who we are. And how dare we turn our back on that?
Before we end this, and again, thank you.
Excuse me.
Oh,
Here's another question.
oh, apologies. So sorry.
Yeah, hi, Tim again. You mentioned the children of the immigration. I'm from Israel. How did you feel when you heard that Susan was arrested in demonstration against the policy of Trump? And can you explain why the Ellen Ball show was cancelled, and is there a chance to revival it?
Which one, the Here and Now? Yeah. Well, first of all, bravo to Susan. You know, she's the real deal. She puts her own, when she expresses an opinion, when she believes in something, she means it. And there should be more people that are willing to be arrested to protest against this administration. And regarding the Here and Now, they don't want to do it a second season. That's disappointing, but I also am fine with it because I've got 2 documentaries I'm cutting right now, another one I'm shooting, so I got plenty to do. And it would have been nice, but c'est la vie.
Miss, one question?
I would like just to share a few words with you, just 30 seconds before you go.
Oh. I don't know if that works, but we're gonna keep going. I just wanted to ask you really quick before we left about Mystic River. Can you just talk about what that experience was like? And you'd spent a lot of time working on your own films before then, and you'd done some acting, but this was really an acting showcase for you and a moment in your career. Can you talk about what you went through with that?
It was first of all, I was able to work with a good friend of mine, Sean, and what I loved about that film was that pretty much everything you see in that film is one take. It's Eastwood does not do more than 2 takes. There was not one scene we shot that I'm aware of that anyone had 3 takes to do something. So everything you see in that film is probably the first take. So as actors, that's kind of terrifying. And so as actors, we were super disciplined. We would meet, the days, by the way, were only like 8 hours long was the longest we ever shot. Usually it's 12 to 14 to 16 hours. But because of the professional idea that we're not going to waste time or film, and you get one chance to do it, we came with our games, you know. And at the end of the day, we would go and we'd read through the next day's scenes, and we'd practice our Boston accents, and we'd talk about the scenes, but we were ready when we walked on the set. And what I loved about that is that when you're constructing a performance over the course of a 7-week or 8-week shoot, sometimes you don't remember what take, you certainly don't know what take they're going to use of the 15 takes you did. So in constructing the kind of arc of a character, it made it super clear when I'm shooting a scene that takes place after the scene that I shot 3 weeks ago, I know exactly what I did.
Is it also because you know, oh, Clint's taking that one because that was it, we ended on that, so he wanted that beat?
What I'm saying is there wasn't that one.
It wasn't even that much.
It was one take. So you knew exactly what you did. So to create the continuity of performance was so much easier because you're not trying to remember or trying to imagine what take they're going to use. And sometimes when you do 15 takes, out of boredom, you just start doing things in different ways. Because you start, what do they want? I can do this any number of ways, you know? So you have no idea what they're actually going to use, right? So sometimes that can be a little uneven. And this one was so zen-like, you know, and so quiet. And it's a whole different experience of making a movie. I really liked it.
And what was it like winning the Academy Award? What did it mean to you?
I remember thinking, oh, I'm glad that's done with.
It can be a long journey. It can be a campaign. It can be a lot.
It was, and I was really lucky because I couldn't do that. I was doing a play in New York at the time. I was doing an anti-war play called Embedded at the Public Theater. And so, you know, that whole dance that happens in awards season, what happens is people come out to LA and basically live there for like 2 or 3 months if you're up for consideration, right? And there's an awful lot of gratuitous parties that you go to, or one goes to try to, I guess, campaign for an Academy Award or a Golden Globe. And I didn't want to do that, but I had a perfect excuse. So, because I had to get back to New York because I was in rehearsal and then performance of a play. So, but that was it was a long stretch, and there was like about 5 different awards ceremonies, and I went to all of them, and I won all of them, and then the Oscars was the last, and I thought, well, that would really suck if I won all those awards and didn't win the Oscar. But anything can happen. And I had a history with the Oscar. They've been banned from the Oscars for a while. So I didn't know what the Academy was thinking. But I was honored, you know, it's great to be recognized in that way and by your peers and by the people in the industry. So yeah, I was really honored. I was happy to get it, but I was also glad it was over. Glad the whole, because it's a little stressful.
That's an understatement for a lot of people. My last question for you before we go is, you said you're working on some documentaries and you have obviously all your other endeavors. When are you going to direct a narrative film again?
Anybody got like $10 to $15 million? I'll start tomorrow. I have a script I've been trying to put together. It's a difficult one, and it's the subject matter, quite frankly. And I still hold out hope. I'm an eternal optimist. I would love to direct again, but it's an environment right now that's a little different than when I last put a film together, and there's different needs and from those that finance, and sometimes the content is scary for them, and I really want to tell this story about faith and hypocrisy and the difference between faith and hypocrisy in religion. And there's three characters in the movie that either are mistaken for or believe themselves to be the second coming of Jesus Christ. So you could see how there might be a little resistance to this idea. But I'm going to do it at some point. We'll get it done.
Well, I hope Netflix gives you the money. They got $1 billion. That sounds like something that you make. Thank you so much, sir. Have a great one.
Thanks very much.